Hi everybody, welcome to season 5 of Educator Yarns. My name is Jess Staines. I'm the director of the Koori Curriculum, which is an Aboriginal early childhood consultancy that's based on Dark and Young Country on the New South Wales Central Coast. We offer professional development for early childhood educators through webinars, retreats, events, and in-services. This time round on season 5 of Educator Yarns, I'll be joined by Bec Burch, who's the founder of Kindy's Australia, which is a program that supports educators in enriching opportunities for play and learning in nature for children. Bec has an extensive background in early childhood education. She leads Bush Kindy's Australia, where they take children into nature spaces in all weather, and it gives them the opportunity to play and learn. Bec has experience that spans over many years regarding training and mentoring in nature play, and she's worked in Nature Play Queensland, TAFE New South Wales, and as well previously Cottonwood Learning. So welcome everyone to season 5 of Educator Yarns, where we'll be mainly focusing on the intersection of nature play and Aboriginal culture and giving advice and hopefully some pearls of wisdom for early childhood educators who are wanting to delve deeper into Aboriginal programs and explore opportunities for rich and meaningful nature play experiences. Before we get into the episode today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered on and pay my respects to elders both past and present, as well as acknowledging any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander educators who are tuning in. Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Educator Yarns. I'm here with Bec Burch from Bush Kindy's Australia, and today we will be yarning to you about the importance of on-country programs and how you can get started with your early learning service. So welcome back, Bec.
Thank you.
I thought a good place for us to start is, why do we advocate for on-country programs, and what is the difference between being out on country and just outdoors in our own outdoor early learning environments within a service? So for me, I think it's about connection to place, and we have a bush block like where I live, and even within our own yard we have our outdoor early learning environment within my own home with a mud kitchen and dirt bikes and a trampoline and all that sort of stuff. But then we also go out the top gate, and for me it's just about being, and we have some rituals and things that we do out there, but it's responding just to being and following children's lead, their curiosity, and observing and noticing differences. I just see there's so many benefits. I think it's great for my mental health for a start, but what's your big why?
Yeah, I think for a lot of services, heading out that gate gives an opportunity for smaller group interactions. Our early learning centres can be very busy places. There's, lots of rooms, lots of children in playground spaces, lots of noise. And when we tend to head out that gate, and whether it's just a walk down the road to a space, or it might be backing onto a bushland, or it might be hopping on a bus, but it tends to be small groups. So I think that's a really beautiful opportunity. I think it gives early learning services opportunity to experience things that they don't get within a fence. When they are busy spaces, we often can't keep even grass alive. So there's a lot more astroturf, or there are some services with their playgrounds on third-story buildings. So it allows those groups to kind of head into the community and experience kind of what we might call wild nature, where there's real wildlife, there's different bugs, different plants, a real opportunity for learning about their local community and really connecting with a real world context about what's out there. I definitely agree with you on the wellbeing one. I think it's really supportive for all children, but particularly children with complex needs. That outdoors space is just so much more calming. There's less of that auditory and overstimulation that some children have triggers with. It's just a quieter, calmer space. And when our programs align with that nature pedagogy, we see a much more slower, focused day. And so it really, really supports that well-being.
Do you just want to remind everyone back a little bit about what you do at Cottonwood Learning and Bush Kindy's Australia in terms of the nature programs that you run there? I'm just mindful that maybe not everyone's listened to this whole season so far for those that are just joining?
Yeah, sure. So at Cottonwood Learning, we are based on the Gold Coast and we have kindy programs for 3 to 5 year old children. We also have playgroup and vacation care programs, but they are all day outdoors. There is no building. So when it rains, like it has the last few weeks, we put up shelters. Children wear their wet weather gear. They're usually the most fun days ever. But we get to explore those spaces. And, whilst we're there, it has a real good opportunity to connect and understand that interdependence between humans and nature and what's living there. We often talk about this is the bird's home and this is the lizard's home. We're just visitors, so we need to look after it. Um, yeah, a whole nother, I guess, opportunity to enrich learning outside of the classroom. And we can still do all those typical kind of things. They're still using fine motor and hand-eye. They're still being creative. They're still doing manipulative, constructive. It's just with different resources. It's just with sticks and pebbles and leaves and things like that. So yeah, Cottonwood Learning, we have those programs. So we have a team of early childhood educators and small groups. And our programs are very similar to, a typical kindergarten program where children are booked in on their regular days throughout the whole year. And then in Bush Kindy Australia, we support educators. So we've got a separate set of facilitators that they've all got many, many years of expertise in nature pedagogy and implementing bush kindy programs across the state. And we go and support educators on how they can implement both nature play within their fence, but also outside of their fence and how they can do that safely, meeting, all the quality standards, meeting A&R and compliance and all of those things and looking at what best practice looks like. So yeah, we just want more children out there every day and we want everyone to do it safely. So, we give everybody risk benefit assessments and templates and policies and everything anybody needs to get kids outdoors more.
And you do that nationally, don't you? Bush Kindy.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the next things that we were going to yarn about was thinking about the key components and the benefits to young children for having a nature-based program. And for me, when we think about the 8 ways of learning, one of the 8 ways of learning is land links. So bringing all learning back to country, looking at exactly what you said, like ecosystems, habitats, like this is the lizard's home and we're just sort of passing through. But no matter what it is that the children are investigating, there's always a connection of how that learning can take place out on country. So exactly what you said, Bec, like these things just dovetail each other, don't they? So talking about like you can do fine motor experiences, but we're using different materials and so forth. But I feel that there's whether we're looking at patterns or we're looking at light and color and reflections and shadows, these are just things that my daughter's been interested in recently that we've been doing out on country. But I feel like there's so much that is opened up to you when you are doing on-country programs that you don't get access to in the classroom. And I know for my daughter, who's 3, who has some additional needs as well, her ability to regulate when she's outdoors in a nature-based program or on country with us and her family is far greater than what she can do when she's indoors, particularly in an early learning environment, whether that's her preschool or it's a play group. And I think there's a lot of overstimulation that happens for her. And whether that's through visual noise or audio noise or just having to socialize and interact and be in that confined space, she does so much better outdoors in her regulation. But what are some key components of on-country programs for you, Bec?
Yeah, I think you definitely nailed it there. I guess going out on country is very much in that slow pedagogy. And I guess some of those key components of that is that child-led play where children are really initiating their own play and learning. So it's supporting that sense of agency where they're actually making decisions about their own play and learning. Because rather than a particular activity being presented on a table or a mat that sometimes can have very predetermined outcomes or type of play that's going to occur, when you're out on country, there might be a pile of leaves or some sticks or some seed pods, and they really can be anything. So it really supports that child-led learning where one child might pick them all up and they become berries and they're making berry muffins in a little mud kitchen. And some other children might pick them up and like, no, they're the money at the shop that I'm going to buy an ice cream down there in their pretend play. For other children, they might just pick them up and start counting them or feeling them because they feel good. So all of nature has just got this endless opportunity where it really supports that child-led learning. And that's one of the key components of nature pedagogy. And when we see children engaged in that child-led learning, we see longer attention span, longer focus. So we see children really engaged for longer periods of time in big chunks of play when we're outdoors. And so that goes hand in hand with that slow pedagogy. And it's always what educators come back and they're like, oh, it's so calm and it's much slower. And the children stay in those spaces at a much deeper level for a lot longer time. I guess the other little key components is that nature pedagogy very much fosters that sense of curiosity. You know, every child's born with it innate awe of, and wonder in their environment, but it is when we're outside that they're asking all their questions about why are those leaves red or which bird did this feather come from? And that's what, you know, sparks that learning and that passion for learning is all of those questions. So that's a really key component. I guess overall, when we're outdoors in nature play and in bush kindy settings, they're using their whole body. They're using all of their senses. It's that very much hands-on learning. So it, yes, like you mentioned, it very much helps children regulate and, you know, meets the different unique ways of learning that each child has. And I guess the other couple of components there is risky play is definitely a part of it. You know, that adventurous play where they might be climbing trees, using sticks in play. You know, for some, the adventurous play is just jumping in a puddle or getting covered in mud. But all of those kind of experiences, they're very much part of that nature play and pedagogy.
I feel like the importance as well of taking infants and toddlers out on country and not just our preschoolers and primary age children. And I feel like sometimes kids get left behind, and sometimes that's a ratio issue, and sometimes it's just not understanding or the benefits or having that value there. But my son's 18 months, so somewhere between, I'm like, he's a toddler, right? But I don't want to that. I like to think he's my baby. He only started walking like 2 months ago, if that, like a month ago maybe. But when we take him out, like it's a whole body thing, all that sensory learning that you were saying, Bec, like putting his toes in puddles and the sand and scrunching and feeling like wet grass under his feet. You know, he just, and it's such a beautiful thing to see him noticing something for the very first time, whether that's like the call of the kookaburras that we have and him stopping what he's doing and looking up and listening, or when the wind blows through the trees and looking at all the branches and the leaves, you know, going and the petals falling down, the leaves falling down, and picking up different types of sticks and feeling the different textures of bark. Like he's noticing, experiencing all of that for the first time, and he loves it, you know, being able to be out there, and he'll stop and he'll look at ants that are crawling along, you know, the ground. So the way that he engages in those spaces is different to Shirley, but both just so beautiful and really rich and meaningful learning that takes place. And I love as well his play group that we take him to. When my husband took him there the other week, they had all of these different rocks that were out. And so less thinking about like tabletop experiences or store-bought experiences, but really looking at how they can bring nature in, because it's a play group and it's
Yes.
the TAFE play group, right? So we're not going out on country there, but just all the different types of rocks and making the rocks wet and grinding them and feeling that they're smooth and they're rough. And that's where he was the whole time, loving it.
Yeah. And children and babies in particular, they're learning about their world from that sensory engagement, right? And there is no kind of sensory toy that we can purchase, no matter how many textures and colors and things and noises it makes, that can match that sensory rich environment of our natural world. It just doesn't match. So, you know, yeah, babies and toddlers with their feet and toes and hands, you know, touching leaves, touching seed pods, it's so important.
Yeah, I agree. So, how do we get started? Because I think educators are sold. I think most educators want to get out at the gate. I feel like sometimes it's the approved provider that sort of goes, well, wait, like there has to be risk assessments and policies, and that's a big part of it. But is that actually where you start with the risk assessments and the policies, or where is the starting point?
I always believe that we need to embed nature pedagogy within your service practice first, within your fence line. So, staff having an understanding of what is nature pedagogy, how can we embed that in our practices every day? How can we bring those elements of like even seed pods and leaves, just like the playgroup, into our playground spaces, into our indoor classroom spaces? And making it a familiar experience there for both staff and children. And I think that's a good starting point is learning and understanding what nature pedagogy is and how can we implement those in those spaces. And I guess then when you want to venture out, yeah, we do need to, get the paperwork and make sure everyone understands that there can be some high risks once we exit the fence, and how we're going to manage those and how can we minimize those. There are thousands and thousands of children going out in bush kindy excursions every day, every week in Australia. And so there are plenty of doing it, and they're minimizing those risks through really good policies and procedures, risk benefit assessments and training. And, we can help you with that. But that is one step of the way. And then I guess getting out, I always say start small. And if start small just means you're taking your babies out in a pram for a 20-minute walk, then that's a great place to start because they're getting fresh air, they're getting sunlight, they're feeling the wind on their cheeks, they're hearing the birds in the trees as they walk past, they're smelling the blossoms on the tree as they go past that. That might be the small, safe step that educators might want to start on. Often the babies get a little bit missed in the bush kindy opportunities. They kind of go, oh, the kindergarten are going to be more safe because, they're older, but there's also a lot more of them. And we can start, you want to start at the real super safe area, they can be in a pram,
Mm.
and just go for a small space, small walk. But yeah, I do always encourage everyone to start small. So, once you've done all that background of paperwork, and trained your staff and you're ready to go out, it doesn't have to be an all day thing. It can just be starting to just go out and read a story and have a snack and come back. So it's really successful, feels really safe, worked really well. And then as time goes on, you can extend that learning, and that time period while you're out there.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think looking at your outdoor early learning environment first and really
Mm,
thinking about how are you bringing nature in is
mm,
a great starting point. I was at a service last week. They had like 7 tables outdoors, and it was a very small outdoor early learning space. So I would say probably half was taken up with tabletop activities, which were just versions of the tabletop activities that were inside. Um, so in situations like that, I try to say, well, let's have indoor outdoor play. And why are we having, like really trying to make use of the natural environment? That was all synthetic, this particular service I was at. So no natural grasses, some plants in pots. But for me, I think let's get rid of the tables and the chairs. Let's do some indoor outdoor play if we want children to have access to those things. Or let's think about the things that you've got set up for them on the tables and how they could be adapted or done in a nature-based experience. So, and I think in instances like that, instead of getting rid of green waste, bring the green waste in. So bring
absolutely.
in big branches and different types of leaves and different types of seeds, that children can investigate and explore. Bring in the fallen logs for children to climb over rather than just having the metal A-frames and so forth. So really
Mm,
thinking about like even like puzzles. So one of the best things that I've seen in such a long time, and I think I talk about this all the time because when I saw it, I was just like, yes, that is what it is. I follow Deadly Science on Facebook, Koori,
mm,
and he does a lot of, work with regional and remote Indigenous community school and early learning services. And instead of having puzzles outside, they had an emu skeleton that the children had
mm,
arranged and put together. And I thought that's it. That's what it is,
yeah.
you know. And I've seen similar with a cow skeleton that was at a service in Orange from, some of the families there were from cattle farms and so forth. And that was brought in myself, one of my prized possessions that I had for such a long time before I returned it to country was a kangaroo skeleton, which I found intact on the side of the road going down to Noons in the Blue Mountains. And I thought,
Mm,
great, because you never find them intact, right? There's always bits missing,
yeah,
or the dog gets to it before you get to it, or whatever it is. And it was great, to be able
yeah.
to have that for children to see. So what, like some people are going to be like,
Nature's puzzle.
he's a freak, like looking, like playing with, skeletons and bones. But, my husband's a butcher and I met him. I used to work with his sister. And I met him because they were doing an investigation on the human body, and he brought in a pickled sheep's brain in a jar for the children to see at the early learning service. And he came in wearing his butcher's gear with this brain in a jar. And one of the children said to him, "Are you a doctor?" And he said, "No, mate, doctor." um, but like I love that. I really do.
Yeah,
I think the more hands-on we can make things, and thinking about, well, what is the land links here, or what is the natural version of this experience that we're trying to
yeah.
reclaiming those outdoor learning spaces to be reflecting that as much as we can. So hi everyone, I'm just jumping in quickly to remind you all that Bec and I have a series of upcoming events and workshops all throughout Queensland, where we'll be yarning about the new ELF principles, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, and sustainability. We'll be in Toowoomba, Cairns, the Gold Coast, Brisbane, Mackay, Townsville, you name it, we'll be there, and we hope to see you all there. All right, take care everyone. Enjoy the episode.
I love that, the natural version of things. And what I often see in services is they, come in the morning and they go and bring a car mat out and might put it on the veranda or outside under a tree. And then they bring cars out. And then again, at the end of the day, it's all going to be packed away. But if we didn't take that, what's the natural version that's already there? And one of the services out, well, this whole garden here is just full of pebbles. Why don't we make tracks with these pebbles? And this creates the road. And there was some branches that had fallen down and they were doing some pruning. And it's just like, why don't we cut these up? And these can be our cars. Or they were using leaf, they were using all sorts of different things. So yeah, I always think about what is the natural version of what you're wanting to plan and provide out there. How can we swap out those resources for something natural that's already there? And I think it just takes a moment to kind of stop and pause and really have a look at our outdoor spaces, because for many of us, we have been trained to like, what's in the cupboard? What's in those boxes? What's in the storeroom? What can we put on tables? What can we put on mats? But if we just take a moment and go, okay, instead of going and dragging that out because I'm outside, what's here that I could utilize instead?
Mm.
And, that's where suddenly you're like, okay, we actually don't need to bring a whole stack of paper out to paint, because there's all this bark that's fallen on the ground because since the wild winds on the weekend, or there's these big leaves that we can actually paint on instead. So just taking that moment to kind of pause and go, what is the natural version that we could do of this same planned experience?
Yeah, right. One of the other things, like when we're getting started, I think is picking a site, right?
Mm,
Um, and we were also going to talk about community connections here, but I think getting some local community connections, that Aboriginal connection, I think would be understanding the history and any significant sites in your area that may or may not be appropriate for you to be using, whether that's sorry business or a women's site, or there's rock carvings there or things that need to be protected. I think getting that kind of consultation from community is pretty important.
mm.
What community connections have you had when developing your programs?
I think even tapping into your council and not necessarily the person that's answering the phone at the front desk, but make an appointment with the environment department, and asking about the particular sites that you are on, because for every site, they have teams of people that have been investigating, researching, monitoring, managing, maintaining those sites. And so, like on our sites, we have um, there's a team of water people that are managing the water. There's a team that look after the trees. There's a team that just look after the land at the park. And so each of those all have different reports. So, I've contacted them and said, is there anything of significance on these sites? Like, is there any particular wildlife of significance? Is there anything endangered? Are there any particular plants of significance? And yeah, they have all that report. It's just something that everyday educators don't ask, but it's all there. And for most services, we tend to use those community parks and reserves for bush kindy. Sometimes we get to use school or we get to use private land, but majorly most of us use those council spaces. And so tapping into them and asking, yeah, about endangered plants or wildlife that are on there. And again, land care and coast care are really great as well. And definitely your locals.
Yes, I feel like we have a local lady that's just at Woy Woy who's like a pelican fanatic, and she has names for all of them, knows how they're all connected, any history, any illness, anything that they've ever had. So whenever we go down there to see the pelicans, she is often there and will tell us about
Yeah.
her pelicans. And she has names for them all as well, which I think is great. So pelican knowledge is something that we're leaning into a little bit at the moment over here.
And I
Um,
think every community has those particular animals that there are passionate people that are looking after and protecting them. And it might be koalas, it might be the bushstone curlew, but I find in every community there is some type of animal, or sometimes it might be a particular plant. We've got a particularly very rare plant on one of our sites, and it's one of the only few left on the whole southeast Queensland. And so there is a whole team looking after that particular plant and trying to replicate that. Um, so yeah, tapping into those kind of community volunteer groups that are looking after those spaces. They have so much knowledge to share.
100%. So one of the last things that we wanted to talk about was program design. So what do we actually do once we've done the risk assessments, we've picked the site, we've worked our way up to it? What do we actually do? Because one of the things that I know we've talked about before is that sometimes it becomes about the stuff, like taking things out with us, and it's not about taking the car mat and the cars and the plastic boats or the buckets and the spades and there's not a lot that we really should be taking. And so
Mm,
one of the sayings that I know that we have is take nothing, leave nothing, um,
mm,
when we're going out. But also I think it's just about being. If I was to take anything, we often would take something that we could draw or do some shading and rubbings of. Occasionally, when we've been looking at a particular type of animal, we've taken plaster of Paris out to actually take the animal track. We've also taken like some bags if we've wanted to collect scat to look at things.
mm,
I've used GoPros on my kids so that we can revisit what they've seen on those experiences. Obviously, a camera, sometimes magnifying glasses we might take, or like the little jars that are magnifying jars that we can put something,
mm.
let it go again once we're finished looking at it. But really, that's about it. And our food, like we don't take very much at all. Um, what's your sort of take on the stuff that you take?
Yeah, definitely don't think we need to take much. And I guess that's why when we support services, we're always looking at what does nature pedagogy look within your service and how can we implement it there and embed it across the practices? Because when children are used to going out into the outdoor space and creating a car track with the rocks and cars with logs, and they're used to having a mud kitchen with the seed pods and the petals and the sawdust that's there, then when you go out into country, they're utilizing those same natural resources. So they actually just go out and oh, there's more leaves here. Oh, there's even better seed pods here. Oh, there's even this. Oh, we're going to have the best mud kitchen ever making pizzas today. It's just an extension of what's already happening in their service. And I guess that's why we spend so much time making sure that foundation is right in the service before you're heading out into country. Um, and when that is embedded in your practices, you realize that when you go out, you really don't need a lot of stuff at all. We don't need to be taking, if we're going to take a whole heap of stuff, we may as well just stay in the fence, right? There's
Mm.
no point just taking stuff to replicate exactly what we're doing. And it comes back to that why. Why are we going out? It's because we want to learn different learning opportunities that aren't available in our playground space within that fence. And so think about, well, what resources can I take that might enrich that? And that would be the magnifiers, the binoculars to look at the birds in the trees. It might be little journals or booklets so they can draw their findings and make their learning visible. It might be some of those reference books, whether it's a spider book or a bird book. It might be some books and resources that you've made yourself that are within that community and that play space. So I think definitely less is best. That we can just support and facilitate children about how to utilize what's out there for play and imagination. And children do pick that up. Like they just start when given the opportunity. I think so often in today's society, children are always fed with things to do, stuff to have. It's just there's a constant stream of activities presented in front of them. So, sometimes when we go out in country, we do have to allow a bit of that transition for children to see that, these leaves really can be anything. They could be the fish today, but they might be the tickets to the ice cream shop tomorrow. So yeah, I think definitely that program design is about only taking the resources that's going to enrich the learning out there. And that's learning about nature and building that nature connection. Um, and I guess the other part of that program design is just how the flow of the day is. And, that natural rhythm, that true nature pedagogy is around child-led. So that means that rhythm and flow, has some flexibility into it. That there still is those often familiar parts of the routine, like coming onto site and setting out the boundaries so we know where it's safe to play and where we're stopping playing. It might be setting up a base camp of where they're going to put their bags or their drink bottles in a central place where they kind of gather together for snacks or things like that. And then some free play. And then I guess you can replicate what happens in your service. So if you're having progressive morning teas, you can potentially still have the same out there. So those opportunities just to move between spaces. And I feel like children just naturally gravitate into little areas, and there'll be, a group that want to be really physically active and are climbing trees. And there might be a group that are really into the engineering and creating and constructing, and they might be building a cubby house or making a swing. And then you'll find some that are just sitting quietly, reading a couple of books or, just bird watching. And I think they just generally flow in between and in all of those different play spaces as they do in our indoor environments. It's probably just a little bit slower.
Have you got questions about nature play, sustainability, or how to meaningfully include Aboriginal culture in your early childhood program? Call 0253 000 306 and leave a voice message for the Educator Yarns podcast. Bec Burch from Bush Kindy's Australia and Jessica Staines from the Koori Curriculum will be answering your questions, offering practical advice, cultural guidance, and inspiring ideas to support your teaching and planning. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your program deeper, your question could shape future episodes and support other educators across the country. Dial in today at 0253 000 306. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. One of my first experiences working in an early learning service was at a service that was family grouped. And so whilst the children's day had this beautiful natural rhythm, free-flowing, child-led, there was no stop everything, let's do group time together, now we're stopping and we're eating, now we're stopping and we're sleeping. Like it was just all very progressive. So whilst their day was very unhurried, we had a very, I guess our role as educators, we had the structure, like we would go and we would do the risk assessment, and there would be a certain time that we would start the first morning tea and so forth. Always things that we were doing within our role to make that rhythm and flow take place. But it's sort of like the children were the duck that was on top of the water that's just sort of gliding through, and we were the things underneath that were doing all these things to make sure that could happen for them, which I thought that particular early learning service, Cavendish Street Early Learning Service, is probably one of the best I've ever worked at, because the children, it was a mirror of their home, of what would be happening there, based on their individual needs, rather than stopping and starting continuously throughout the day. So I love that when you've got a site that you're basing yourself there, that the morning tea can happen when it needs to happen, the lunch can happen, the rest can happen when it needs to happen. There might be spaces that you set those sort of zones up, as you sort of mentioned, underneath a tree or so forth. Or some people have those wraps. I don't know what you refer to them as, that they wrap around the tree that has all the bits and bobs in it for when they're out. That's sort of like a home base, if you like. But I really do think that the more, even as educators, we can be still and just be, and really lean into that idea of like yarning with children and having yarning circles or looking at circle of security where we're grounded in a space instead of up and moving around, but just down in the spaces with children. Um, that's what I enjoy doing, at least with my
Yeah.
children, being where they are and responding to where they want to guide me.
Yeah, I think there's that real opportunity when we are out on countries just to be present in the moment. And to be honest, there's not a lot of times that as educators or even as children that we just get to do that. Life is quite busy in our society today, but I do see everything slowing down in that kind of slower flow and rhythm. And as educators, I see it really nurturing as well because it is supporting our well-being as well as children. When we can just enjoy being with children and engaging with them and interacting, there isn't this push of like, oh, we've got that on, we've got that next, we've got this next. We see children, and there's research that backs up how children's attention span and focus and concentration is longer when they're outside because it's driven by that intrinsic motivation when they're in child-led play. And so as educators, I hear feedback all the time of how much more rewarding it is because they're actually getting to have really sustained play with children and really supporting their development and learning because that play frame is a lot longer period and they can really engage with children.
Mm. I just thought I also mention in part of that rhythm of the day is when I went to Evans Head Preschool, which is on like the North Coast, New South Wales sort of area. When I went out on country with Kirby and Kath, which are two of the educators up there, one of the things that they do before they take their children out onto country is they sing to country. They sing out to country and let country know that we're here and we're asking permission to walk on it and to be and to connect with it. And I felt that that was a really beautiful experience and part of the rhythm of what they do with children. So it's that kind of thing that when you're connecting and consulting locally about the site that you're going on to and any protocols of being on that site, that community can share with you how they would like you to engage. Even with my daughter, when we go out, we do acknowledge country because I feel like for me, we say a lot of acknowledgements of country, sometimes so much that it can feel a bit empty and monotonous, the words that we're saying. But I never feel that way when I'm acknowledging country, when I'm actually physically on country with my children and we can connect that to what it is that we're doing around us, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So,
Yeah, and I guess we do that a lot with children too, that when we do the acknowledging in the morning, it's never just this straightforward one sentence thing that we say. It always ends up a discussion and it never looks the same from day to day because it's whatever is presenting in front of them. It might be because there's been lots of rain or they're noticing the lizards are there. But part of that conversation is because we're doing the acknowledgement and it's about showing respect for the space that we're on and acknowledging that we're going to care for it, we actually talk about, well, how are we going to care for land today? Like, what are we going to do? And they'll say, we're not going to break any branches or pick any leaves, or we're going to pick the rubbish up. So there's always this discussion about how they're actually going to look after the space that they're on. So I think when we are going out into those kind of bush kindy programs, there's an opportunity for children to really see that acknowledgement of country as a real action because you're actually out there on those spaces and it's not our space, it's not our playground of our childcare centre that we own or whatever. We're going into a public space that we always say doesn't even belong to us, it belongs to what lives there. So it gives a real opportunity for us to explore with children about how we're going to look after it, not leaving rubbish behind, not even popcorn crumbs that the bird might eat, might give them a bellyache. So yeah, I love that we can kind of put that acknowledgement into action and share that in the morning.
yeah. Well, thanks, Bec, for letting me pick your brain about nature programs. I think you are the queen of this, the perfect person to be asking and for educators to be listening to who are considering developing a nature program, and even those that are not considering like how they can improve upon their outdoor early learning space within their environment, within their service existingly. If we have piqued your curiosity and you would like to know more, then you can visit our website. So Bush Kindy Australia and Cottonwood Learning for Bec and Koori Curriculum for myself. And on both of our websites, you'll find a list of the events that we are running together. We are going to everywhere and anywhere: Brisbane, Gold Coast, Toowoomba, Townsville, Cairns, Mackay. I don't know, probably left someone out, but we are going to be everywhere, and we would love to see you at one of our workshops where we'll be talking about more about the intersection between sustainability and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. To find out more information about the Koori Curriculum and how we can best support you and your early learning service, visit www.kooricurriculum.com.